All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar focusing on the impact of precision scheduled railroading. My name is Jorge Masalari, and I'm a Senior Vice President and Practice Lead for the oil and gas sector with Argo. We will be taking your questions during the session. For that, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will consolidate the questions and answers as many as possible at the end of the presentation. And we will also be recording the session and make it available to all participants in case you would like to review it or share it afterwards. Okay, let's get started. The objective of the webinar today is to share some expert advice to those of you being impacted by precision scheduled railroading practices, now adopted by most Class 1 railroads in North America. And if your company has not yet been impacted by precision railroading, stay tuned and listen carefully because you may be next. The term precision scheduled railroading was coined by railroad legend E. Hunter Harrison, who was CEO of CN, CP, and CSX up to his untimely death in 2017. In each case, Hunter Harrison introduced new levels of efficiency and dramatically improved the financial and operational performance of his railroads. However, these improvements often came to the detriment of his clients. Having worked with every major North American Class 1 railroad, and particularly all of Hunter Harrison's railroads, Argo is very familiar with precision scheduled railroading. And as I mentioned, while precision scheduled railroading has been a game changer for the Class 1s, there are potential risks and challenges for your companies that you may be exposed to. Consider the following figures as part of the impact of precision scheduled railroading during the last 5 years. Between the first quarter of 2017 and the first quarter of 2020, operating ratio has improved between 4 and 9 percentile points for the 4 major Class 1s in the US. During the same period, train speeds have increased by 7% and terminal dwell times have increased by 13%, primarily due to the point-to-point delivery method by eliminating stops and consolidating intermediate switching. Also, Class 1s have consolidated rail networks to eliminate shorter, less efficient lanes in favor of high volume, highly lucrative lanes. For example, CSX eliminated 40% of their lanes, while UP and NS combined eliminated 425 low volume lanes. All these measures may mean for customers more restricted Class 1 schedules, tighter inventory and car dwell requirements, and even higher switching and storage fees. I'm joined today by an exceptional panel that is well equipped to help you navigate precision railroading risks and countermeasures, the things that your company should be doing to improve margin, even during these times of COVID. First, let me introduce Clarence Gooden. He's a former president and vice chairman of CSX Corporation and an Argo board member. With more than 47 years of experience in the rail and transportation industries, particularly in areas of operations and growth strategy. David Turner, Director, Rail Projects and Compliance, Phillips 66, Surface Transportation and Logistics. David has over 30 years of industry experience in energy and chemical segments with a diverse background that includes midstream, planning, marketing, and operations. Besides Phillips 66, David also spent time at ConocoPhillips and DuPont. Ron Bethman is Argo Vice President and leader of operational implementations for transportation operations and maintenance, leader of the Phillips 66 project that we'll be discussing today. So in the company of one of our clients today, we will discuss the current state of precision railroading and what it means for commercial relations and specific operational challenges for petrochemical, chemical operators, and others. Let's begin with a high-level overview of precision scheduled railroading. For that, I will turn it over to Clarence.
Thank you, Jorge.
Yes.
As most of us on this webinar are aware, PSR for the U.S. and the North American rails is here, and it's moving forward as a strategy of choice. As in Canada, where the principles were established on a large scale, the process starts as a cost management effort, significant reductions in headcount, longer trains, use of distributive power, tighter connections, and a focus on a trip plan that is geared toward car compliance. It's also characterized, though, by a significantly reduced sales forces and reduce in CapEx spending, particularly as stated as a percentage of revenue. There's still strong focus in the industry on the cost management and cost reduction. You'll recall in the last earnings presentation, the railroads had approximately one third of their entire locomotive fleet in storage. And it's true the velocity is up and the dwell is down, but the volumes are also down. What you're still faced with are the storage charges, the fleet utilization, their remaining major factors, and the critical first mile, last mile still remains an area of focus, an Achilles heel, if you will, for the rail industry. There is a series of articles written recently in Trains magazine, the June, July, and August issues, that talk about what is the next steps for PSR. The title of the article is PSR 2.0. I would encourage those that are have it available to read it. It talks about how the rails are going to have to make themselves relevant. And this afternoon, I think you'll see a case study where a major oil and gas company was able to, through lean management and the practices at Argo, make significant savings and being a part of the PSR. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Turner.
Thank you. So the challenges that we're seeing in the petrochemical operations kind of start with ourselves. We look at our plant priorities. Rail is often an afterthought, at refineries anyway, receiving minimal capital or attention, leading to sub-optimized capacity and lost profit opportunities. Refineries move almost all feedstocks and finished products by pipeline and marine vessels, leaving rail to handle byproducts like coke and sulfur, as well as some specialty products. Our rail challenges are similar to the rest of the petrochemical industry. We have limited rail resources and expertise. We're experiencing increasing rail freight and demurrage costs and seeing declining service levels. Unratable cycle times requiring larger fleets. And then there's the challenge of changing tank car specifications to 117s. So taking this down a level to specific rail optimization projects at 2 of Phillips 66 refineries, working with Argo, we saw daily operating plans and goals for the most part did not exist. Little to no metrics or KPIs, limited collaboration between rail operations and the rest of the plant. At the rail racks, we experienced sub-optimized capacity from misaligned switching plans, as well as frequently missed switches. We also saw an underloading of rail cars. In our rail yards, where we're really feeling the added impact of precision scheduled railroading, we're seeing more plant congestion, higher demurrage and storage costs. All these things combined have created a lot of opportunity for improvement.
Thank you, Dave. This is Ron Bethman. And as Dave just described, there were multiple challenges to address. And it's important to point out that these challenges are quite common for industries that are trying to capitalize on the efficiencies of rail transportation. We see this all the time. The good news is that something can be done to minimize those impacts and overcome these challenges. For the efforts we will discuss today, we spent 6 to 10 months at each refinery working to thoroughly understand these challenges and help drive improvements to overcome them. Over the next few slides, I'll provide a high-level review of the journey to drive improvements to the rail logistics operations at each of these facilities. Our scope was the same for both facilities: optimize the rail logistics operations, including coordination with the Class 1 railroad providers and the fleet asset management. As you can see, we collectively captured in excess of $16 million in value. This is comprised of $15 million in margins and another $1.5 million in cost savings. We achieved these results primarily through improvements in the first mile, last mile of the operation. Areas of concern Clarence and Dave both mentioned earlier. So to achieve this, we improve load rack capacity, optimize switching operations, improve car availability, and implement an effective performance management system. Argo uses a systems approach to drive sustainable improvements. And for this effort, we focused on these 4 primary work streams: rail yard operating systems, the load rack operating systems, the daily performance management of those systems, and then the appropriate application of smart digitization to improve effectiveness and sustain the improvements. We began our journey with a deep dive analysis of the operation to help understand and quantify the root causes of the challenges identified. Before any changes can be made, we must have data-driven analysis to rule out perceived problems and separate symptoms from root causes. This included an in-depth review of the car cycle times of targeted fleets with significant conclusions. The example presented here presented one of the longer hauls on the network. We picked this one because of the widely held perception that the Class 1 railroads' transit time was the main driver of cycle time. Well, the first thing the data allowed us to do was to rule out that perception and show that Class 1 lighter road travel time was not the primary contributor to high cycle times. And this is rarely the case, and certainly not so here. Keep in mind, train velocity from point to point has always been a railroad priority. That's amplified now with precision scheduled railroading, which also places significant emphasis on the intermediate switching yards, shifting from slower hump yards to flat switching operations, skipping intermediate yards altogether. So where's all the time loss? As we are repeatedly emphasizing here, the primary factor for high cycle times are from the components of the first mile, last mile. The data showed a significant loss in third-party storage and transit or sit yards. Now with this information, we're able to take a deeper dive into the components of these time losses and determine the root causes of these delays. We then were able to develop solution sets and make improvements in these areas. These improvements provided significant results specifically with car availability, storage and handling costs, and fleet size. And we got the Class 1 railroads off the hook for line of road transit times impact on cycle time. However, the rail provider's performance can significantly impact the first mile and last mile challenges. As shown here, the data shows the Class 1 service level was underperforming for the refinery's demand. The requirement of 5 days of service was rarely met, as shown in the weekly averages in the bar charts. This lack of reliability and inconsistency creates uncertainty and variability in all yard and loading operations, forcing these operations to become reactive. It gets even more complicated with multiple operations sharing common track spaces and leads. For example, one refinery handles both pet coke unit train and a manifest local train service, all using the same track leads. When both trains arrive at the same time, or if the unit train arrives at the wrong time of day, operations were severely disrupted or stopped altogether. This performance was a huge problem for the facility and needed to be corrected without making capital improvements in new. Our next work stream focused on the loading rack performance. The first question to be asked, is the load rack optimized to meet the refinery's needs, either feedstocks or outbound products? This chart compares the required loading performance to the actual performance. Note, not only were the loading times excessive, but also variability in the number of cars loaded each day. The loading rack rarely met the daily loading requirements. This performance resulted in the load rack being perceived as a plant bottleneck and that nothing could be done without capital improvements. The reality was that through creative process changes, not only did we create capacity to meet existing demand, we created more capacity than was required, thus providing the opportunity for growth and cost reductions. So in order to better understand and improve the loading rack's ability to meet the demand without capital investments, We analyzed the variables impacting availability and utilization of the load rack equipment and personnel. There are typically many variables that impact the performance, so it's important to quantify them to assist in creating a prioritized improvement plan. The analysis showed the effective daily loading capacity was less than 50%. Using multiple problem-solving tools, a traditional fishbone shown here, we were able to identify many of the variables impacting this loading performance. It was essential to engage the operators who perform the work on a daily basis. In doing so, we were able to get to the real root causes of the problems and start identifying potential improvements. For example, we realized that each loader performed the car inspections and loading sequences differently. No standard workflow procedures existed. When asked which methods were the best, each operator, of course, claimed the one they used was the best. We also learned that the load crews would often be waiting 6 to 8 hours for the load to be pulled and respotted. And sadly, they had no idea of all the challenges the switch crews were facing that were causing this inefficiency. Well, now that we have the facts and the data to make sound decision-making, let's transition into the improvements phase of the projects. Following the work streams presented earlier, we start the improvement process by establishing an effective daily performance excellence management process. It is essential to any business to not only have a performance management system in place to openly track performance against KPIs, but to ensure the process is blame-free, unemotional, and transparent. Philosophically, we must learn to accept the premise that problems are good. This is a struggle for many managers, but the knowledge and acceptance of problems then presents the opportunity to fix them and improve the operations. This is what the PULSE process enables. The PULSE process is a daily stand-up meeting to review the KPIs of all the key functional stakeholders. This is especially important for rail logistics part of the business. Although not a core competency of the business, there is significant financial opportunity if properly managed. Now, this is not the traditional status meeting. It is a quick hitting review of exceptions and tactical decision-making. We first define a clear set of KPIs that target value generation for the business, in this case, the refinery. What are the key indicators that help us understand the impact of performance of each functional area on the ability to generate value for the refinery? The PULSE process provides a quick daily review of performance of these KPIs. It is a process of identifying what went wrong, enables fact-based decision-making to apply countermeasures to prevent it from impacting today's operation or recover losses. And for systemic and recurring issues, it establishes the foundation for long-term problem-solving continuous improvement. A disciplined PULSE process is the management team's most effective tool to ensure long-term success. Through this process, we expose daily issues from the front lines, made effective decisions for day-to-day execution. The process generates immediate results. All functional stakeholders are involved. They understand the impact they have on the operation and on each other, and they identify specific actions to be taken to resolve issues. It works. This is where we started to identify, document, and correct the Class 1 service issues, yard congestion issues caused by old unusable cars, rack equipment downtime, and fleet management issues. And the best thing about a proper PULSE meeting is that it should take 15 minutes or less. It is also important to capture the daily information, preferably electronically. By capturing the daily KPI performance electronically, it enables the ability to conduct detailed analysis to drive long-term improvements and create electronic dashboards and share the information to all who can influence the outcomes. It creates the opportunity to be completely virtual once matured. The next work stream was to redesign and standardize switching and loading operations. This involved clear understanding of the refinery requirements, developing value-generating solutions, and implementing standing operating procedures to consistently ensure effective execution. The data shows significant variability in the switching performance and the load rack starting times. The standard operating procedures we developed and implemented significantly reduce this variability in the switching operations and the spotting and pulling the load rack in a timely manner. This allowed the loading operations to optimize existing resources and begin loading operations at the same time each day and enable increased loading capacity. With the load rack operators, we then developed best practices for sequencing the loading based on load times for all products, thus optimizing the load rack system for maximum production. The immediate result was meeting all daily loading requirements with the existing resources in less time. This increased capacity resulted in $1.9 million of additional margin for new products. It created cost reduction opportunities from reduced labor cost and growth opportunities to double existing products and exploit the full capacity of the refinery. We also had to work with the Class 1 provider to improve their performance. Working together, we coordinated the plant operations with the railroad operations to create win-win scenarios. We established a terminal clock with defined service windows for both manifest trains and unit trains. We put a measurement system in place to hold everyone accountable. And the result was the immediate end to poor service from the rail provider. The car cycle analysis we performed identified several issues impacting car availability, especially first mile, last mile issues. Improvements were implemented to eliminate the reverse routing from the sit yards and return the cars directly back to the plant for loading. We were also able to demonstrate the ability to reduce loaded inventory buffers without impacting customer performance, primarily because the new consistent production levels from the loading racks. The fleet management changes resulted in nearly complete elimination of empty cars stored in the sit yard and a 26% reduction in the number of loaded cars in storage. In addition to better car availability, we also eliminated freight, storage, and handling costs. In the last work stream, we conducted a detailed brown paper analysis of the rail logistics process, starting from the inbound car from the Class 1 provider to the outbound billing, complete, and departure. This is a clear case study for the need to apply smart digitization to existing processes and systems. Our analysis quickly exposed a very manual, labor-intensive, reactive process. The process was loaded with non-value-adding steps and disjointed handoffs between the functional groups trying to perform their daily jobs. We quantified the impact of many challenges felt every day by those performing the work. The manual information exchange was sporadic and time-consuming. 30% of all switches were redundant handling of the same cars. Underutilized load rack. High level of manual oversight to ensure quality. The manual printing, scanning, filing paper, and emailing to complete the process. As you can imagine, there was a high stress and frustration getting the basic everyday work completed. The burden of compiling most of this information fell to the switching company's trainmaster. The first task each day was to create the switch list for the day. This process was reactive with multiple inputs: current inventory, inbound cars, outbound cars, load rack needs. And most of the communications involved phone calls, emails, spreadsheets, and even fax machines. The effort was time-consuming and a cumbersome challenge for the team. This presented significant need to improve this process with the smart digitization tools. But that in itself can be a challenge. IT typically involve expensive development, implementation, and support costs, which usually do not make the cut in the funding process, especially for the rail logistics functions. However, the best solutions in today's smart technology arena are low-code, no-code type solutions that can be more easily developed and implemented without huge IT budgets or support. We use various tools to automate and speed up these manual daily processes using off-the-shelf application tools like Power Apps, Power BI, and Iobea. With Power Apps, we designed a simple application for the users to enter the data, which is then immediately available to all via web access. Named the Automated Load Rack Reporting Tool, Alert, the process starts with the refinery identifying the products to load or unload. Then to the train master selecting the appropriate cars to match the demand and provide what's needed to create a switch list. And then electronically share the information for the load rack crews, who then document each step of the loading process on a handheld device, making the status information available to decision makers in near real time. The application of smart digitization of frontline users' tools can significantly improve the operation and make the operator's job easier and more effective. We've covered a lot of material very quickly on how we implement improvements to adapt to the PSR environment, improve first mile, last mile, and increase plant performance and margins. Now let me turn it back over to the customer, Dave Turner, to summarize the financial benefits of the rail logistics optimization effort. Dave?
Thanks, Ron. The two projects that Phillips 66 worked on with Argo resulted in annual rail improvements valued at $16 million. This was accomplished by increasing rail capacity without capital investment. Those resulted in higher margins from increased high-value feedstock rail imports, optimizing rail car loading, in other words, reducing our transportation costs per unit, adding a new product to an existing rack, again without additional capital, optimizing the rail fleet and reducing storage costs, switching and labor cost reductions, improved rail service from a Class 1 railroad, which I did not think was possible. In summary, these improvements would not have been accomplished without Argo's approach of working shoulder to shoulder with our operators, contractors, refinery management, and business units to bring about sustainable change. Argo brought a high level of expertise and experience to our refineries, developing and coaching us through process improvements for us to get the most out of our existing rail resources. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks, Dave. Thank you, Clarence and Ron. Some really interesting material, and we are doing really well on time. So we've got time for a good Q&A now. So I've been collecting some of your questions and summarizing some of them as well. And I think we can start with a couple of them that have gotten the most votes. Let's see. So this one says, when talking about first mile, last mile challenges, what were some of the root causes and the delays at the sit yards? I guess some of the storage yards that may be in that area of the refineries.
I can take that one, Jorge.
Sure, go ahead, Ron.
Probably the most significant one was actually a result of what are normal operations in the railroad industry, specifically the policy of reverse routing. Unless it's specifically delineated in the bill of lading, the empty rail car will be routed back to its origin, which is logical, assuming the origin is actually where the plant is, where the car needs to be. What we discovered was that loaded cars were being originated from a sit yard during their initial storage phase and not the actual facility. Therefore, they would be the routing back came back to that same sit yard. So while, and again, this is not uncommon, especially when you're buffering to customers, but the bill of lading for the return must specify the final plant destination and not the sit yard. So again, it's a common industry practice. So asset managers, logistics managers need to be aware of this and make sure the bill of lading actually gets the car back to the yard. This was a significant impact to the operation and one of the root causes we came across. We actually discovered in our visits to the sit yard, the perception was that maintenance was being performed, and there was some car mods and that sort of thing, but those were controlled evolutions. But there was a perception that even other maintenance was being done, including cleaning of the cars. And as it turned out, none of those things were happening. It was purely the car just sitting there waiting to be rebuilt out to the plant, and then actually potentially occurring additional freight costs. So that was one of the significant root causes we found in the cycle time, the time losses.
Thanks, Ron. That sounds good. Good detail. So I have another question here, and I think this one's going to be for you, Dave, related to the level of support from the different refineries. I guess, when we talk about refineries, we're talking about the RLT, the management team, knowing that these areas of the operation, meaning rail, transportation, et cetera, or trucking, tend to be not seen as a priority for the refinery. As we know, refineries are always more concerned about reliability, maintenance, and their production. So these are not seen as a priority. But what was your view on the level of support, and how were they, adopting these projects?
Thanks, Jorge. It starts off slow, and it works its way up. But the best way that I found to do this is you start with a value proposition, and it goes something like, if I could fix my rail issue, it would be worth X, some amount of money. And then confirming that with the stakeholders in terms of that value, and see if that's actually worth resources. And then from there, it's bringing in the experts to just do a quick assessment and say, hey, is this opportunity look real? Is this worth pursuing? And that's where we've partnered with Argo on 2 of our refineries. And at that point, it becomes an economic analysis. You're looking at, how much of this value proposition can I capture versus the expense associated with bringing in consultants to work us through this. And what we found is that the first one, they were a little bit skeptic, but through the progress and the success, the second one went very quickly because the proof was there. The other thing that was really helpful for us in that process was actually talking to some of Argo's clients, other refiners. So they talked us through the process, helped us understand what that would be like. We're able to confirm that the results were there and that they were sustainable.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. I have a few questions here, a couple of areas that are showing some interest. One of them is digitization, and I'll leave that one to the next question. So I'm going to continue with a question around class 1 railroads level of service. And I guess, Ron, you're probably best one together with Dave to answer this one, because there's some questions about improving that level of service, as we did in that case that you showed before. How did that negotiation go, or I guess how did that conversation go with class 1s, and what was the approach that the team took to ensure that that level of service was improved with the class 1s?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact we had initially was when we met with the class 1 providers, the local folks. Typically, the refineries don't have the rail expertise to tell when they're being told the true story. So in the first meetings we had, the folks we met with were sitting across the table from other railroaders. In one case, I had one superintendent say to me, "Oh, so you guys are all railroaders, so I guess there'll be no lies today." So once you get past that, the railroad is like any other business. I mean, they need to take care of the things that make them effective, make them money, and they're going to focus on that. So it can't be a competitive thing to you do this or else type of thing. You got to get to these win-win scenarios with them. Specifically, their operations run in a tightly timed schedule, and your operation may be very minuscule to what their overall revenue is and what's actually running down that same line of road that serves your facility. So you don't have a lot of leverage, but at the same time, the railroads recognize you as a customer, and they know they have to meet their commitments. So, but you got to do that with facts and data. So we had that information. We went to the local division managers, and we had these conversations about their performance, showed them the data. They went and verified it against the data they had. And then collectively, we worked to identify what worked best for both parties to be successful. And that's what when I mentioned earlier, we put together, service windows that worked well for the operations at the plant, but they also worked with the coordination between the mainline traffic in the areas and the local traffic for their schedules. So again, it's a cooperative effort. It's just getting transparent and honest feedback with each other. And then again, developing win-win scenarios so everyone's successful. Dave, Clarence, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think you covered it very well.
Awesome, Ron. You're hitting home runs. I do have a question here, actually a couple of questions related that I think go directly to Clarence. And here's one of them. One of the early infographics talked about line of road repairs. With reduced locomotive fleets, it looks like line of road delays due to locomotive mechanical issues are critical to avoiding upstream and downstream delays because trains need to make it on time and not be installed because the impact can be cascading. Clarence, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the person that asked the question is absolutely dead on. The mean time between failures for the locomotive fleets has much improved in recent years. And if you look at the third of the locomotive fleet, which is in fact stored, it tends to be either the older fleets, it tends to be the fleets that are higher maintenance cost or higher fuel consumption. So the newer, more efficient locomotives tend to be in service. And on these long trains, they're using this distributive power. It becomes very important, particularly on the distributive unit, that the reliability be there, or you just simply couldn't get the train across the road.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
Jorge, let me throw some in here also, Jorge. I think with today's environment, with volumes currently in a down state, they're able to get by with these fewer locomotives. But as inventories need to be replenished and volumes start to pick up, that traffic is going to get heavier, and that's going to maybe result in even more poor performance to the end customers. So I think it's very important for the facilities to take advantage of, call this period of downtime, to take a deep look at your first mile, last mile operations and get these things taken care of before the increasing volumes come back.
Okay, thanks, Ron, for that extra comment there. So we have a few questions about digitization. I think it's an interesting topic because, obviously it's new. Many new tools are out there that are being proposed by different vendors, and they take different approaches. Of course, there's the question about sensors, question about artificial intelligence, but I guess let me start with the question around what was our approach? What is Argo approach to applying digitization tools in these kinds of environments according to the opportunities. So I can chime in at the end, Ron, but I'll let you take a first shot at that, and we can build the topic that way.
Yeah, so our focus primarily, typically, IT solutions are normally led from a corporate level environment to monitor the business, and typically the line level IT is usually may not get a lot of attention. So our focus, if we can improve the day-to-day execution of the value generating work on the front lines, in the yards, at the racks, if you can improve the effectiveness of those operations, that's going to work its way all the way through the fancy financial SAP environments that companies invest so much time, effort, and money into. So our focus is, what tools are out there that we can apply without huge IT budgets, without creating a huge IT staff to support them. What's out there? So today, the digitization tools are much better off-the-shelf products, the low-code, no-code tools. We spent a very short amount of time pulling together the load rack reporting tool and did a proof of concept, within weeks without IT support. The actual implementation of using the system, we had more problems with just the security access than we did the actual tools. So our focus initially is on what can we provide to the operator today that's not just a cumbersome data entry tool to serve some back office operation, but it's information and data that streamlines their work and makes their job easier every day. That's where we focus on some of the digitization things that we can apply quickly.
Yeah, and I would add to that, there's a lot of questions usually about integration and how difficult it is to, or how long does it take to develop some of these tools. And I would add that these low code, no code type of new solutions that are out there allow us to, first of all, define a very surgical type of solutions that are mainly defined and extremely useful for the end user, which is the folks on the field. They either working in the switching yard, or working in the loading rack, or support areas such as traffic control or billing. And this was that example that you showed before. This is a tool that did not require any major corporate IT support. That's a big deal. And secondly, it was fairly quickly developed and put into action for the benefit of the end user. Same way that we're using and developing the different electronic dashboards that were extremely useful for, and are being extremely useful for, the pulse process, the daily performance check that the teams are doing, but also for picking up and lifting the information from the app that we discussed before, and getting KPIs from switching, loading, performance, etc. in general. So fairly straightforward, and very much dedicated to the final user. Any other comments from your side, Dave, or from any of the users right now at the sites about this topic?
No, I don't have anything on that.
Okay. So there are a couple of questions around different requests, or not requests, but maybe fees or changes in the way that the final customer, in other words, the refinery or the plants, in their interaction with class ones as it relates to stringent requests and in terms of performance internally, in terms of storage or car cycle, but also if you guys have noticed any increase in fees whether they are storage fees, switching fees, or freight costs overall as a result of the implementation of precision scheduled railroading. So I'll leave that one to you, Dave, and or Clarence, to comment on that.
Well, where we were seeing it was particularly around, demurrage. So with some of our facilities, we may have gotten 30 spots, for example, in the local yard. And, as soon as our contract's up, the railroad's saying, hey, you don't have those 30 spots anymore, and you're now paying, close to $100 a day on a hazmat car. So that adds up pretty quick. The other place we were seeing it is just in storage fees. So to avoid those costs, if the local yard even has the space, you're looking at outside storage. So you're paying for the storage, you're paying for the freight to get it in and out of storage, and then you're also increasing your fleet size because your cycle time is increased as a result of having an extra stop.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Any comments on that, Clarence? Additional comments?
No, the facts are those storage charges are part of the whole philosophy of precision scheduled railroading. Depending on your perspective of it, they're either punitive, or if you're on the other side of that fence, you're saying, well, I'm trying to encourage you to move the assets. And it's a tough situation, particularly when you set up as a corporation, your supply lines and your logistics lines for both storage and transit, as well as how cars will tend to bunch on you. So it's something that the customer is going to have to pay attention to, and that the carriers are going to continue to charge, in my view, those higher prices.
Thanks, Clarence. And I think we're nearing the end of the session, but I do have one final question here related to sustainment of results after the projects. So how is Argo assuring to sustain results after the projects are completed? And as part of that, how is the transfer of knowledge happening at the client site? So Ron, maybe you can take a first shot at that first.
Sure. I mean, our approach going in, which is probably not common to most consulting firms, our approach is to do a significant knowledge transfer to the customer so the customer can be self-sufficient without dependency on external expertise. And you do that by creating solid standard operating procedures that are dynamic and teach the client how to manage and change based on performance and how things are occurring. When the environment changes around you, a standard operating procedure needs to change, and standard operating procedures are the minimum, not where you need to be. So you should be continuously updating that and improving your operation, and then having your standard operating procedures be dynamic. We assist in documenting that through a playbook, which helps them move forward. But again, I think one of the most important parts is teaching the tools of continuous improvement, thinking of the mindset of continuous improvement, understanding value to the business, and then measuring that business every day. But as we coach the management teams at the sites, we teach them and coach them how to execute the pulse process, which again, like I said in my earlier remarks, this has got to be blame-free, open and transparent, and the focus has got to be not calling somebody out for not performing, but to identify and accept the challenges, and then collectively, ask the questions of what we need to do to fix something. But we teach the local management teams how to do this, and from day one, we're in the front of the room. And the idea is by the end of the contract time, we're in the back of the room, and the operation is running without us. That's our objective. And that's typically how we build in the sustainability as well.
Okay, Ron.
I
Any other
was,
comments?
this is Dave. I was just going to add that, you know, what we did, one of the refineries that we've completed is we took that playbook and we put that into, you know, Phillips 66 process format, and then reference that into the individual job descriptions, as well as putting those into individual goals.
Yep. Thanks, Dave. Okay, very good. So we've reached the end of the webinar. I hope it's been useful for all that have participated. Thank you for your time. And like I said at the beginning, we will also, this session is being recorded, and we're going to make it available to all of you and all the participants in case you want to review it or share it with other members of your team. As well, we're going to be sending a white paper